The town of Millfield had always seemed quiet, almost painfully so. Streets were lined with aging houses, each with a manicured lawn and a faded mailbox, as if time had slowed down here, giving the impression nothing ever went wrong. But that calm was deceptive. Jacob Miller, a 28-year-old mechanic, had lived in Millfield his whole life. He liked the routine, the simplicity. That Thursday evening, though, something felt off. He was closing up the small garage where he worked, the sky outside turning a burnt orange as the sun sank behind the distant hills. His phone buzzed with a message from his sister. "Emily, did you hear about Sarah?" Jacob frowned. Sarah was a college student who had grown up in Millfield, but had recently moved to the city. The message was brief, cryptic, and concerning. He called her immediately. "Jacob, thank God." Emily's voice trembled. "Sarah didn't come home yesterday. No one's seen her." Jacob's stomach sank. Millfield was a safe place, or at least, it had always seemed that way. People left their doors unlocked. Kids rode their bikes alone. Neighbors borrowed sugar without a second thought. A disappearance was unheard of. "Did she mention going anywhere?" Jacob asked. "She said she was meeting someone at the old diner on Route 12. Then, nothing. Her car is gone from the lot behind the diner, too." Jacob's mind raced. The diner had closed years ago. It was abandoned, boarded up windows, peeling paint, and rumors of drug activity at night. But who would take Sarah there, and why? He drove immediately to the diner. The tires crunched over gravel, the headlights cutting through the thickening dusk. Parking a safe distance away, he approached the building cautiously. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and old grease. Rusted booths lined the walls, and broken glass crunched under his shoes. He found nothing at first, just the eerie silence of a place abandoned for decades. But then he noticed the scraps of paper stuck under a floorboard near the counter, crumpled receipt from a nearby gas station, dated the night before, and scrawled on the wall in faint charcoal were numbers, a phone number. Jacob's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and dialed. The call went straight to voicemail. Jacob hung up the phone, a knot of unease forming in his chest. The diner's dim interior seemed to close in around him. Whoever had Sarah had left a breadcrumb trail, but it was faint, and time was against him. He decided to return home and organize a plan. On the way back, he called Emily again. "Listen, I'm going to the police. We need to file a missing person report now." Emily hesitated. "Jacob, you know how small Millfield PD is. They'll say she's probably just with friends or ran off. They might not take it seriously until 24 hours pass." Jacob gritted his teeth. He hated this, the waiting, the bureaucratic excuses. "I'm not waiting. I'm going tonight." By the time he arrived home, night had fully settled. The streets were quiet, but not in the peaceful way they usually were. Every shadow seemed exaggerated, every rustling tree suspicious. He grabbed a flashlight and his old baseball bat, the only defense he felt he could rely on. Jacob began retracing Sarah's steps. He drove slowly along the main road, Route 12, glancing at every gas station, convenience store, and abandoned lot. Then he noticed something odd. Tire tracks leading off the paved road onto a narrow dirt path flanked by thick woods. His heart raced. The tracks looked recent, deep enough to suggest a heavier vehicle. He parked and followed them on foot, crunching over leaves and twigs. The forest was alive with night sounds, hoots of owls, rustling branches, distant calls of animals, but Jacob barely noticed. His eyes stayed on the trail. After 10 minutes, he reached a small clearing. There, in the center, was a car. It was Sarah's. The headlights were smashed in, the doors slightly ajar. His stomach dropped. He called out, but only the wind responded. He carefully approached the vehicle. Inside, there were signs of a struggle: overturned seats, a torn handbag, a broken phone charger. And then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A single shoe lying in the dirt just outside the driver's side door. Jacob realized this wasn't random. Someone had planned this. Someone had watched Sarah, lured her here, and left evidence deliberately. He pulled out his phone to call the police again, but there was no signal. Millfield's outskirts were notorious for dead zones. Panic edged his thoughts, but he forced himself to think clearly. He needed a plan, not hysteria. He decided to mark the location and head back toward the main road to find a signal. Every step back through the forest seemed longer, every snap of a branch louder. He felt eyes on him, maybe just paranoia, but it didn't matter. The feeling alone was enough to make him break into a jog. Finally, he reached a patch of open road and got a signal. He dialed 911. His voice was steady but urgent. "This is Jacob Miller. My friend. She's missing. I think she's in danger. There's a car in the woods off Route 12. The dispatcher assured him someone would come, but it would take time. Meanwhile, he couldn't just wait. He had to stay close to make sure whoever was there didn't get away. Jacob drove back slowly, keeping the headlights focused on the forest edge. And that's when he saw it. A figure, crouched near the car. They froze when they saw him, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, without warning, the figure disappeared into the woods. Jacob's pulse thundered. He grabbed his flashlight and ran toward where he'd last seen the person, calling out Sarah's name. There was no reply, just the rustling of leaves and his own panicked breaths. Somewhere in the darkness, he knew the danger was real, and it was close. Jacob pressed forward into the trees, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness. His mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Whoever had taken Sarah wasn't just a random stranger. This felt calculated, deliberate. The forest closed around him. Every step on the fallen leaves and twigs echoed unnaturally loud. Then, a faint sound, a muffled cry, barely audible, coming from deeper in the woods. "Sarah," Jacob called, his voice shaking. There was no immediate response, just silence. But then, he heard it again, a whisper, urgent and panicked. He ran toward it, stumbling over roots and rocks, until he reached a small depression in the ground. There she was, Sarah. She was on her knees, hands tied behind her back, dirt smudged across her face, tears streaking down her cheeks. The faint beam of moonlight revealed her terror. "Jacob," she gasped. He rushed to her, fumbling with the rope. "It's okay, I've got you. We're getting out of here." As he freed her hands, the sound of movement behind them made him freeze. Someone was coming, not running, not panicked, deliberate, controlled footsteps. Jacob grabbed Sarah and pushed her toward a denser part of the forest. They ducked behind a fallen tree as a man emerged into the clearing. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. In his hand, he held a large hunting knife. Jacob's heart pounded. He had no weapon other than the baseball bat in his hand, but the bat felt heavy and useless compared to the threat before him. He whispered to Sarah, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The man scanned the clearing, his eyes sharp and calculating. He circled the area slowly, as if he knew they were hiding somewhere close but couldn't pinpoint them. The tension was unbearable. Every snap of a twig made Jacob flinch. Finally, the man walked back toward the car, muttering something under his breath. Jacob exhaled slowly, his muscles trembling. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. "We have to move," he whispered to Sarah. "Follow me, slowly, stay low." They crept through the underbrush, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the man. Every sound, the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, made them flinch. But after 20 minutes, they reached a small dirt road. Jacob's phone buzzed. The police! Relief flooded him, but he kept moving, knowing they weren't safe yet. A car pulled onto the road, headlights cutting through the darkness. Jacob waved frantically. "Over here. Please, help." The police stopped, and 2 officers jumped out. Jacob led them back toward the clearing. The man was gone. The car was still there, abandoned, but Sarah was safe for now. Jacob knew one thing. Whoever had done this wasn't finished. This was only the beginning, and Millfield would never feel safe again. By morning, Millfield was buzzing with news of Sarah's disappearance and miraculous recovery. Jacob sat in the small police station, exhausted, recounting every detail to Officer Reynolds, a veteran who had seen his fair share of small-town troubles but nothing quite like this. "Are you sure about the car in the woods?" Reynolds asked, jotting notes. "And the man?" "Yes," Jacob said, rubbing his temples. "He had a knife. Tall, dark jacket, baseball cap. I didn't get a good look at his face. He circled the clearing like he knew we were there, but he didn't seem panicked. He was waiting for something or someone." Reynolds nodded grimly. "We'll send a unit to the area, but you know how it is. That forest is big. If he's smart, he's gone by now." Sarah sat quietly in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, her hands still trembling. Jacob glanced at her. She had been lucky, so lucky, but the fear in her eyes suggested she would never forget that night. The investigation unfolded slowly. Officers scoured the woods, interviewed neighbors, and tracked vehicle registrations. But Millfield was a small town. Everyone knew everyone else, and yet no one had seen anything suspicious. It was as if the man had appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Jacob didn't sleep that night. Every creak of his old house, every rustle outside his window, made him tense. He replayed the forest, the man's movements, Sarah's terrified face. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. 2 days later, the police found the abandoned car. Inside, there were fingerprints, but no clear leads. The knife was gone. There was no clue pointing to the perpetrator. Emily called Jacob, her voice shaky. "Do you think he'll come back?" Jacob didn't answer immediately. The thought was chilling, but he couldn't let fear control him. "I don't know," he said finally. "But we need to be careful. We need to watch Sarah and ourselves." As the week went on, Sarah tried to return to normal life, but every step outside felt dangerous. The town that had once seemed peaceful now felt like a cage. Every stranger on the street, every passing car, sparked a wave of panic. Jacob took it upon himself to help her feel safe. They installed new locks, kept a constant eye on their surroundings, and checked in with the police daily. But deep down, Jacob knew the man was still out there. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone had the patience and skill to evade capture. Then, one evening, a package arrived at Jacob's door. No return address. He opened it cautiously. Inside was a single photograph. Sarah, asleep in her room, taken without her knowledge. Jacob's blood ran cold. The man was still watching, still close. Jacob and Sarah spent days preparing. Every move, every route, every corner of the property was analyzed. They knew the man was cunning, patient, and dangerous. But they also knew they couldn't live like prisoners forever. They had to act. That night, they waited. Hidden cameras, motion sensors, and strategically placed lights were their allies. Jacob kept the baseball bat close, though he knew it was barely a defense against a knife-wielding predator. Around midnight, a shadow slipped across the yard, slow, deliberate. The man was back. He moved like he knew the land intimately, avoiding the camera's focus until he reached a blind spot near the back fence. Jacob held his breath, signaling Sarah to stay low. The man crouched, testing the motion sensors, examining the perimeter. Then he stepped into the open, reaching for the fence gate. That was the moment Jacob acted. He jumped out from behind the tree with a yell, swinging the bat with every ounce of strength he had. The man stumbled, barely catching himself, but Jacob didn't stop. He yelled for Sarah to call 911 while continuing to press the attack. The man lunged, and Jacob barely dodged. In the struggle, the bat slipped from his hands. Panic surged, but Jacob used every instinct he had, pushing, kicking, maneuvering. Finally, the man stumbled backward, tripping over a garden hose and falling hard onto the gravel. Sarah ran forward, grabbing the knife from the man's belt before he could recover. "Stay down," she shouted, trembling but resolute. By the time the police arrived, the man was still struggling, disoriented but alive. Officers restrained him, handcuffed him, and finally secured the threat that had haunted them for weeks. Jacob and Sarah were shaken but safe. The relief was immense, though neither would forget the terror they had endured. At the station, the man refused to speak, his motives unclear. The authorities speculated he might have been a local with grudges, someone who had studied their routines for weeks. He had no prior record, no clear reason, just obsession and danger. For Jacob and Sarah, it didn't matter why. What mattered was that it was over, at least for now. The morning after the confrontation, Millfield felt quieter than ever. Jacob and Sarah sat together on the porch, sunlight filtering through the trees, but neither spoke much. The world seemed ordinary again, but the shadow of fear lingered in every corner of their minds. The police had taken the man into custody, and his identity was slowly revealed. A local resident with a history of petty thefts and erratic behavior, but no prior violent crimes. Psychologists speculated that his obsession with Sarah had grown out of a mix of delusion and opportunity, a chilling reminder of how ordinary people could become dangerous under certain circumstances. Jacob tried to resume normal life, returning to the garage each morning, tinkering with engines, and keeping his mind occupied. Sarah, however, struggled to find her rhythm. The fear that had gripped her during those nights in the forest didn't vanish with the man's capture. She avoided walking alone, flinched at shadows, and sometimes woke in the middle of the night, convinced someone was outside her window. Jacob did his best to support her, attending counseling sessions together and creating routines that made her feel safe. They installed locks, cameras, and even motion sensors around both homes. Millfield's residents rallied around them, offering reassurance, but the memory of the ordeal lingered like a dark cloud. One evening, as Jacob and Sarah sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, Jacob spoke quietly. "We made it through. That's what matters. We can't let fear control us forever." Sarah nodded slowly, gripping his hand. "I know, but sometimes I still feel him out there, watching, waiting." Jacob squeezed her hand, feeling a chill at the thought. It was a realistic fear, one that would take time to fade. Even though the man was behind bars, the memory of how close danger had been, how vulnerable they had been, remained. Life in Millfield began to normalize, but Jacob and Sarah were changed. Every routine, every quiet night, carried the weight of their experience. They learned to be vigilant, cautious, and aware. The town remained peaceful, but for them, the line between safety and danger was no longer as clear. Months passed. The police had closed the case after the man was charged with multiple offenses, including stalking and attempted assault. Millfield slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Life on the surface seemed ordinary, but for Jacob and Sarah, normality was fragile like glass. Sarah began to leave the house more often, accompanied by Jacob or trusted friends. She returned to her college courses and even started volunteering at a local shelter, trying to reclaim her life. But every time she passed the wooded area near Route 12, her stomach tightened. Memories of that night of darkness, footsteps, and the feeling of being hunted surfaced and bitten. Jacob continued his work at the garage, often locking up extra carefully, checking security feeds, and keeping his bat within reach. He realized that vigilance had become part of his life, a permanent layer of caution that he couldn't shed. One evening, Jacob and Sarah sat on the porch, the crickets chirping around them, the same way they had in the summer before the ordeal began. Sarah leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked quietly. Jacob sighed. "I don't know. He's behind bars, yes, but someone like that, someone capable of what he did, doesn't just disappear. And there will always be someone else out there. We just have to stay aware, live smart, protect ourselves." They sat in silence, the night enveloping them. The fear hadn't disappeared completely, it never would, but they had survived. They had confronted real danger and endured. That resilience was something no shadow could take from them. As they turned to go inside, Jacob noticed a faint movement at the edge of the yard, an old trick of the wind. A stray animal, he couldn't be sure. For a fleeting moment, his pulse quickened, the old terror resurfacing. But he didn't panic. He held Sarah's hand tightly, and together they stepped inside, shutting the door behind them. Outside, the night remained dark and quiet. Millfield was still a peaceful town, but for those who had faced danger head-on, safety was no longer guaranteed. It was something they would earn every day, with awareness, caution, and the uncheckable memory of that terrifying week. Even in the calmest towns, shadows lingered, and sometimes, just sometimes, danger was closer than it seemed.